I was standing at the marina that morning, the sun glinting off the polished decks of million-dollar yachts. My suitcase was beside me, my boarding pass in hand, and my heart lighter than it had been in years. My daughter, Alyssa, my only child, had invited me on a family yacht vacation along the Florida Keys. It was supposed to be our way to reconnect after months of distance. Then my phone buzzed. One single text shattered everything. "Mom, there's been a change of plans. You're not coming on the yacht. It's for family only." For a moment, I didn't understand. I reread it twice. It's for family only. My own daughter, the one I raised alone, the one I helped through college, the one I bought a beach house for, had just erased me with 8 words. All around me, couples laughed, children pointed at seagulls, engines roared with excitement. But inside me, something went silent. I didn't text her back. I just stared at the horizon, the waves folding and unfolding as if mocking me. But before I tell you what I did next, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and comment where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. Because what happened after that text was the beginning of the quietest, most unforgettable revenge of my life. But before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. The message hung on my screen, its blue glow cutting through the morning air. I stared until the words blurred into the glare of the sea. It's for family only. The phrase echoed, soft but cruel, like a door closing in slow motion. Around me, laughter rippled from nearby decks. Someone shouted for champagne. The smell of salt and fuel mixed in the wind, the sound of ropes tightening against metal. Life went on. Mine paused. I thought of the months I spent planning this trip, checking weather reports, buying light summer clothes, believing a simple vacation might fix years of unspoken tension. Now it all felt ridiculous, like a blueprint drawn for a house that would never be built. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it sat there, heavy and sharp. My phone buzzed again, but it wasn't her. Just a travel reminder. For the first time in my life, I felt like a guest in my own story. I didn't cry. I just stood there until the laughter from the boats turned into noise and the sea lost its color. I realized the worst kind of silence isn't when no one speaks. It's when your own heartbeat feels like an echo. On the yacht, I could see them moving about, Alyssa's bright hair catching sunlight, Nathan adjusting his sunglasses, the photographer circling for the perfect shot. My daughter was waving to the camera crew, pretending the world was perfect. She didn't glance once toward the dock where I stood. Maybe she thought I had already left. Maybe that was easier for her story. I'd spent decades making sure she never felt abandoned, yet here she was, performing her life as if I had never existed. The irony stung. I had designed their beach house, planned every inch of their comfort, and still managed to vanish from their picture. I watched her lift a glass of wine, laughing, her joy rehearsed. Nathan kissed her temple, the kind of gesture people use when they know someone is watching. I wondered if he was the one who told her to send that text. The yacht began to drift from the dock, slow and graceful, like forgiveness leaving without me. My reflection trembled on the water's surface, fragmented by the ripples. I didn't wave back. I simply whispered to myself, "So this is what being forgotten looks like." The engines roared, the cheers grew distant, and I turned away before the sound could break me. The parking lot shimmered with heat as I dragged my suitcase across the concrete. Every wheel turn sounded louder than the last, echoing against the metal railings. I walked past families loading beach bags, kids tugging at their parents' hands, laughter spilling like music I no longer recognized. My car was parked beneath a palm tree, dust gathering on its hood. When I reached it, I stopped and looked back at the marina. The yacht was only a white speck now, cutting through the blue. I thought about calling her, demanding an explanation, forcing her to face me. But I didn't. I opened the trunk, placed my suitcase inside, and closed it gently, as if sealing something far heavier than clothes. The air smelled of sunscreen and gasoline, the kind of scent that used to mean summer. Now it meant loss. I sat behind the wheel, hands trembling just once before they steadied. I told myself to breathe, to drive, to move. The engine hummed to life, low and certain. As I pulled away, the rearview mirror caught one last glimpse of the sea, a bright reflection that burned and faded at the same time. I whispered, "Let them sail. I'll find my own shore." When I reached home that evening, the sky was soft with fading pink light. The calendar on my kitchen wall still displayed May, my birthday month. A single card sat unopened on the counter, a printed message from my insurance company, not from my daughter. I laughed quietly at the irony. All those years of planning other people's celebrations, yet my own day passed like any other Tuesday. I poured myself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching neighbors set tables outside, their lights flickering with the rhythm of an ordinary joy. Somewhere in that simple scene, I felt the distance between what used to be family and what was left of it. The phone remained silent. No call, no message, no excuse. I thought about the times Alyssa was little, how she'd bake me cupcakes from boxed mix, always too sweet, always messy, always perfect. I had told myself we'd get back there one day. Instead, she sailed away on a yacht, leaving me behind with quiet walls and a flickering candle. I blew it out, not out of anger, but resignation. Some birthdays remind you how much you've given. Others remind you how little you're remembered. I turned off the lights, whispered happy birthday to myself, and let the house settle into stillness. The following night, I couldn't bear to cook. The fridge was filled with leftovers that carried no meaning. I dressed simply, put on a linen blouse, and walked down to the small Italian restaurant 2 blocks away. The place was full of tourists and laughter, the kind of noise that almost hides loneliness. A young couple sat beside me, their hands tangled together. They spoke softly, planning their future, their eyes bright with the illusion that everything lasts forever. Across from me, an elderly man read a newspaper, glasses slipping down his nose, a glass of wine half empty. I smiled at him, and he smiled back, a silent recognition between strangers who had both lived long enough to understand quiet evenings. When my pasta arrived, I twirled the first bite absent-mindedly, listening to the chatter around me, realizing that I had spent years dining with people who were family by name, but strangers by heart. Tonight, at least, these strangers owed me nothing. I paid my bill, left a generous tip, and walked out into the night. The air was warm, alive with faint music from the pier. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace, a fragile, borrowed kind, but peace nonetheless. Back home, the house seemed larger than usual, echoing every sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, even the creak of the floorboards sounded like reminders of absence. I sat on the couch, scrolling through old messages from Alyssa. Her words blurred together, holiday plans, photo captions, polite thank yous. Then I stopped at the last text. "You're not coming. It's for family only." I read it again, not as a wound, but as a mirror. Family only. I began to wonder when we stopped being that. Maybe it wasn't the yacht that changed everything. Maybe it was the years I spent fixing, smoothing, designing our lives so she'd never feel the cracks I lived through. I thought love meant protecting her from every rough edge. Instead, I built walls so smooth she never learned to climb back to me. The room dimmed with sunset. I caught my reflection in the glass. Older, quieter, but still standing. Alyssa's words echoed again, softer this time. Less of a curse, more of a truth I finally understood. I whispered to the silence. Maybe I never was family to begin with. Maybe I was just foundation. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, streaking the living room with pale gold. Dust floated in the air like tiny memories refusing to settle. I walked through each room slowly, touching the edges of furniture I had chosen, the curtains I had sewn, the photographs I had framed. Everything was perfectly arranged, but nothing felt alive. On the mantel stood a family photo, Alyssa, Nathan, and me, on the day I gave them the beach house. Her smile was bright then, full of promise. I reached out and traced her face with my finger, leaving a faint mark on the glass. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, deliberate. The plants by the window had begun to wilt, their leaves curling toward the floor. I opened the blinds wider, letting the light flood in, as if sunlight could make up for affection. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender, the scent I'd always used to make the house feel warm. Now it felt like a disguise. I sat in the armchair, folded my hands, and realized I had built a home so perfect that even loneliness found comfort here. In the attic, I found a wooden box marked with my late husband's handwriting. Inside were letters tied together with a fraying blue ribbon, each one yellowed at the edges. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the air thick with dust, and the faint smell of cedar. The first letter was from the year Alyssa was born. He wrote about sleepless nights, laughter, and how my eyes looked softer when I held her. As I read, the ink bled slightly under my fingertips, as if time itself had tried to erase the tenderness. Another letter mentioned the house we dreamed of by the sea, the one I eventually built on my own. Every word was a reminder that I had once been seen, cherished, chosen. By the time I reached the last envelope, my throat ached. There was no grand revelation inside, just a single sentence. Don't let our home become your cage. I folded it carefully and placed it on top of the pile. The attic light flickered, and I smiled faintly at the irony. It wasn't the walls that trapped me all these years. It was the memories I kept dusting instead of letting them rest. That night, I walked into my study and noticed the portrait hanging above the fireplace. It was painted years ago, when I was still designing homes full of light and laughter. In it, I stood in front of one of my completed projects, a wide smile on my face, my hair caught in a summer breeze. The artist had captured me younger, certain, unaware of how much that certainty would cost. I studied the brushstrokes, the confident lines, the warmth in the colors, and realized how much of that woman had disappeared into blueprints and deadlines. I had drawn houses that others lived in, yet I hadn't designed a space where I could simply exist. I ran my hand along the frame, feeling the dust on my fingertips. The past had texture, and tonight it clung to me like paint that never dried. I thought about taking the portrait down, but something stopped me. Maybe it wasn't a reminder of what I lost, but of what I once dared to build. I turned off the lights, leaving only the moonlight to illuminate my younger self. The next morning, I dialed Donovan Pike's number. His voice was steady, formal, the same tone he'd used when handling my husband's estate years ago. I told him I needed to confirm ownership of the beach house, the one Alyssa believed was hers. Papers shuffled in the background, his breath deliberate. "Julia," he said after a pause, "your name is still the only one on the deed. You have full rights." The words landed with quiet precision, like the click of a lock turning. I thanked him, my voice calm, though something inside me trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. He asked gently if I was planning to sell. "I'm planning to simplify," I replied. There was a silence that felt respectful, not prying. Before hanging up, he said, "Whatever you decide, make sure it's for peace, not for proof." His advice lingered long after the call ended. I placed the phone on the table and stared at the soft glow of the morning sun. For years, I had let others define what family, loyalty, and love were supposed to look like. Now I held the legal proof that none of it had to be shared. I smiled faintly. As the evening light slipped through the blinds, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the open window. The horizon burned gold, the kind of beauty that makes silence feel sacred. My laptop hummed softly on the table beside me, the blue folder icon glowing like a small heartbeat. Inside it were all the scanned documents Donovan had confirmed. Proof, leverage, freedom. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure if I was ready to act. Selling the beach house meant closing the last chapter that tied me to Alyssa's world, yet keeping it meant remaining a silent shareholder in my own erasure. The sun dipped lower, painting the room in amber. I thought of my husband's letter, of his warning about cages disguised as homes. My reflection appeared on the glass, older, wiser, tired but not defeated. I opened a new email draft addressed to my realtor friend Teresa. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard, then began to type. Each word felt like an exhale I had owed myself for years. When I hit send, the sky outside had turned violet, and for the first time, so had my heart. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I brewed coffee, the smell filling the air with something close to comfort. On the counter lay my phone, a single new message from Teresa confirming she'd found an interested buyer for the beach house. My pulse quickened, not from excitement, but from relief. I sat by the kitchen table, watching the first line of sunlight crawl across the floor. There was no dramatic music, no audience, no applause. Just me, a woman who had finally stopped waiting for permission to take control. I smiled, not the polite kind used for photographs, but a quiet, private one that came from deep recognition. The world outside was waking up, birds beginning their morning chorus, the city slowly stirring. I whispered to the empty room, "They'll never know this moment existed." It didn't matter. It didn't. This was mine alone, the smile no one saw, the peace no one granted, the power no one could take back. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through me like light after a storm, and thought for once how beautiful it felt to be unseen. By late afternoon, I found myself at the old brick bank on Broad Street. The marble floors echoed softly beneath my heels as I entered, the scent of polished wood and paper reminding me of every decision that ever mattered. A young teller greeted me with a bright smile and directed me to Mr. Andrews, the branch manager. His handshake was firm, professional, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding behind my calm expression. I explained that I needed to review linked accounts and verify all active credit lines under my name. He typed quickly, his screen flickering blue and white. "Yes, Mrs. Bennett, there's a joint line connected to your daughter's household expenses. Would you like to keep that active?" I paused, then smiled politely. "No, thank you. I'll be closing that today." He nodded, unaware of the gravity behind such a simple request. Papers slid across the desk, my pen tracing each signature without hesitation. The final click of this pen sounded like the closing of a chapter. When it was done, I gathered the documents, folded them neatly, and stood. "Anything else I can assist you with?" he asked. I met his eyes and replied softly, "You already have." Outside, the afternoon light was golden and forgiving. I walked back to my car feeling lighter, freer, as though I had quietly rewired the foundation of my life. The next morning, I met Donovan at his downtown office, the kind with tall windows and shelves lined with law books that smelled of dust and certainty. He poured coffee for both of us before placing a crisp folder on the desk. "These are the transfer papers for the Isle of Palms property," he said, sliding them toward me. The blue cover shimmered faintly in the light. "Once you sign, the sale will be processed within 48 hours. I opened the folder slowly, scanning each page, my name appearing again and again in bold print, as if the universe needed to remind me that this chapter still belonged to me. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Donovan asked quietly. I looked out the window at the passing traffic, then back at him. "I'm sure. Some homes are meant to be lived in, others are meant to be released." He nodded, understanding without pushing further. I picked up the pen and signed each page with steady strokes. When I finished, he stamped the final document with an audible thud. "It's official," he said. I smiled faintly. "Good. Let's make sure the buyers use it better than we did." We shook hands, and as I left, the morning air outside felt clearer, like the world had exhaled with me. That evening, back at home, I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking. Numbers filled the screen, precise and indifferent. I stared at the total balance, watching the digits shift as transfers processed in real time. Years of careful saving, design commissions, and quiet discipline had built a fortune I rarely thought about. Yet there it was, undeniable proof that my stability had never depended on anyone else. I created a new account under a discrete alias, one that linked to no family name, no shared access, no trace. It wasn't about secrecy, it was about sovereignty. Each transaction I made felt like a brushstroke on a blank canvas, deliberate and graceful. I transferred funds into this new space, enough to build a foundation, literally and metaphorically, for whatever came next. The confirmation email arrived with the subject line, "Account successfully established." I leaned back, breathing in the quiet. Outside, crickets hummed beneath the soft hum of streetlights. I thought of Alyssa and Nathan somewhere on that yacht, floating above borrowed waters, unaware that the ground beneath them had already shifted. I closed my laptop, finished my wine. The papers arrived the following morning in a neat envelope sealed with the realtor's emblem. I laid them on the dining table beside my cup of tea, steam curling upward like a slow exhale. Every line, every clause had already been reviewed. All that was left was my signature. I uncapped my pen and paused for a moment, studying the blank space that waited for my name. For years, I had signed documents for others, contracts, approvals, parental consents, always as someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's provider. This time, I was signing for myself. I pressed the pen to paper and wrote slowly, each letter precise, deliberate, final. The ink shimmered faintly in the morning light. When it dried, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a door opening inward. I placed the signed pages back into the envelope, sealed it, and stood. There was no ceremony, no witness, no need for validation, just me and the quiet rhythm of a life being rewritten. I walked to the mailbox, dropped the envelope inside, and smiled as it disappeared from sight. No one saw it happen, but I did, and that was enough. Teresa arrived just before noon, her perfume carrying the faint scent of jasmine and professionalism. We hadn't seen each other in over a year, but her smile was as warm as ever. "You look peaceful," she said, stepping inside and setting her briefcase on the counter. I almost laughed at the word. Peaceful wasn't something I'd been called in a long time. She walked through the living room, eyes scanning the decor. "Everything looks pristine, Julia. You've always had the eye." I poured coffee for us both, the clinking of porcelain filling the spaces where old friendship tried to reemerge. "I'm selling the beach house," I said simply. Teresa turned to me, brows lifting slightly but without surprise. "Are you sure?" "Completely." She nodded, pulling out her notepad. We discussed logistics, listing prices, potential buyers. Every number, every date, every detail came together like lines in a blueprint. Familiar, calculated, controlled. When she asked why now, I hesitated, then replied, "Because I finally remembered whose name is on the deed." She smiled knowingly and didn't press further. As she left, she promised discretion and efficiency. I stood by the doorway, watching her car pull away. For the first time, I felt like I was designing something not for a client, not for a family, but for myself. Later that afternoon, Teresa emailed the preliminary documents. I opened them carefully, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting across my glasses. There it was, in black and white. Property of Julia Bennett. I traced my finger along the digital page, feeling the strange satisfaction that came from seeing truth turned tangible. Every line, measurements, location, legal clauses, looked sterile on paper, yet to me, they pulsed with quiet life. This wasn't just a property, it was a symbol of everything I had built and been forced to release. I printed the pages and placed them on the dining table, aligning the corners perfectly, just as I did with fabric swatches years ago. The old designer in me couldn't resist the precision. The house had once been my gift, my gesture of love. Now it was my statement of independence. I highlighted the clause confirming sole ownership and underlined it twice, the pen gliding smoothly. The hum of the printer faded, replaced by a calm silence that felt earned. I realized in that moment that the house existed in two versions, one standing by the sea, the other right here in my hands, and the one on paper was finally mine again. 2 days later, Teresa called. Her tone carried a subtle excitement beneath the calm professionalism. "Julia, we may have found the perfect buyers, a young couple from Atlanta, doctors, newly married, no drama, cash ready." I smiled at the word drama. It sounded foreign now. "They'd like to visit this weekend," she continued. "Would you be willing to meet them at the beach house?" I hesitated. glancing toward the framed photograph of that same house on my wall. "Yes," I said, "one last visit might be good." We set the time, and after hanging up, I sat in silence for several minutes. My reflection shimmered faintly in the window, superimposed over the ocean photo. It looked almost poetic, past and present layered in a single image. I could already imagine walking through those rooms again, not as the decorator, not as the mother, but as the rightful owner saying goodbye. I made a note to bring the deed papers, not because they were needed, but because I wanted to carry the proof in my hands. Some closures, I had learned, needed to be witnessed by the soul before they could be signed by the law. Before heading to the coast, I met Donovan at a quiet cafe tucked between office buildings. He was reading the financial section when I arrived, glasses sliding down his nose. "You look different," he said as I sat down. "Lighter." I smiled. "I suppose I've been doing some editing." He chuckled, stirring his coffee. We discussed the pending sale, the documents already in motion, and the funds that would soon transfer directly to my account. "You've handled this with more grace than most," he said. "Revenge tends to be loud. Yours feels architectural." I laughed softly. "Design always starts with subtraction." He nodded, understanding immediately. The waiter brought our pastries, and for a brief moment, we sat in comfortable quiet. Donovan adjusted his tie and leaned in slightly. "You know, Julia, closure doesn't always mean cutting ties. Sometimes it means designing new ones, cleaner ones." I met his eyes, grateful for the wisdom. "Then maybe this is my renovation," I said. We finished our coffee without another word, letting silence do the rest of the talking. As we stood to leave, he handed me a sealed folder. "Your copy of the deed. Keep it safe." I placed it in my bag and smiled. It's safer now than it's ever been. That evening back home, I laid Donovan's folder on the table. The seal was crisp, official, unbroken. I ran my fingers over the embossed emblem, feeling the raised texture beneath my skin. The weight of it was heavier than paper. It carried the gravity of freedom. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I lit a candle and poured myself a glass of wine, letting the soft glow of the flame dance across the envelope's surface. For years, every document in my life had represented responsibility, proof of care for someone else. This one was different. It didn't demand anything. It didn't tether me to anyone. It simply affirmed what already belonged to me. I finally broke the seal and unfolded the deed, reading my name once, slowly, as if savoring it for the first time. Property of Julia Bennett. The words didn't just declare ownership, they declared identity. I refolded the pages neatly, slid them back into their sleeve, and placed them in the drawer beside my late husband's letters. The candlelight flickered and I smiled. Later that night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through flight listings. The cursor blinked beside the words, "Round trip, Charleston to Nice." For years, my sister Lydia had invited me to visit her studio in France, a coastal town painted in sunlight and sea salt. I always declined, claiming work, health, or responsibility. But now, with the sail in motion and silence finally filling the spaces where resentment used to live, the idea of leaving no longer felt like running. It felt like returning. I selected the flight for Thursday morning, the earliest available. The confirmation email arrived seconds later, the screen glowing with quiet finality. A ticket to freedom disguised as an itinerary. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of waves crashing beyond the harbor. For the first time in a long while, my life wasn't dictated by anyone's schedule, but my own. I printed the ticket and folded it neatly into my journal, between the pages where I used to write design sketches. Those lines had once been walls and windows, now they were horizons. I turned off the lamp, the ticket safe beside me, and whispered, "Nice, how fitting." The sky was still pale when I began to pack. The quiet hum of morning made every sound sharper. The creak of the wardrobe, the rustle of folded clothes, the soft click of my suitcase lock. I laid my sketchbook on top of a red dress I hadn't worn since my last exhibition. The fabric shimmered faintly, catching the early light. There was no sadness in the act, only precision. Each item I placed inside represented something I was willing to carry forward. Everything else stayed behind. I paused by the window, sipping the last of my coffee, watching the first blush of sunrise spill across the water. For years, dawn had been a symbol of repetition. Another day to endure, another cycle of silence. Today, it was permission. I took one last look around the room. The walls were bare now, the photos gone, the furniture stripped to essentials. It no longer looked like a home. It looked like a page turned clean. I zipped the suitcase, the sound slicing through the quiet like punctuation. Then I whispered to the empty space, "You kept me safe. Now let me go." Outside, a car horn echoed faintly in the distance, calling me toward a different kind of morning. By the time I arrived at the beach house, the sun had climbed high enough to gild every wave in silver. The air smelled of salt and memory. Teresa was already there, standing by the porch with a clipboard and her ever-present efficiency. "Final walkthrough?" she asked. I nodded, unlocking the door. The sound of the latch releasing echoed louder than I expected. Inside, everything looked pristine, staged for the new owners, white curtains swaying gently, furniture positioned with textbook symmetry. Yet beneath the perfection was an absence so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. I walked slowly through each room, fingertips grazing the walls I once painted myself. The laughter, the arguments, the years, they all seemed to hum faintly through the floors. "It's beautiful," Teresa said behind me. I smiled. It always was. We reached the back deck overlooking the sea. The horizon stretched endlessly, sunlight flickering like a heartbeat. I turned to her. "Once they sign, make sure the funds go directly into my independent account." She nodded. "Of course." I looked out one final time and whispered, "Goodbye doesn't always mean loss." Then I locked the door and handed her the keys. The airport was bathed in soft amber light, that in-between hour when departures feel like confessions. I found my seat by the window and watched ground crew move methodically below, guiding metal in motion with quiet choreography. The engines roared to life, a deep vibration that trembled through my bones. As the plane lifted off, Charleston unfurled beneath me. Its bridges, its rivers, its familiar geometry of memories. I pressed my forehead to the glass and smiled faintly. The clouds opened like slow-moving curtains, and beyond them, endless sky. I thought about Alyssa and Nathan, still somewhere between their return and realization. I thought about Lydia waiting with paint-stained hands and open arms. But mostly, I thought about myself, not as a mother, a widow, or a provider, but as a woman mid-flight, reclaiming the authorship of her own story. The seatbelt sign blinked off. I reached into my bag and took out the folded letter from my husband, the one that warned me not to let our home become my cage. I read it once more, then tucked it away for the final time. The plane tilted toward the Atlantic, sunlight flooding through the window. Below me, the past grew small enough to fit in my palm. 3 days after I landed in Nice, the message I'd been expecting finally came. Not to me, but through Teresa. "They're back," she said over the phone. "Alyssa and Nathan just returned from their yacht trip." I walked to the window of Lydia's studio, looking out over the bright French coastline. The sea below sparkled, indifferent to human drama. "And?" I asked softly. Teresa hesitated. "They went to the beach house this morning. The new owners were already moving in." I could almost see it, the confusion on Alyssa's face, the way Nathan's confident smile would falter as reality set in. "Did they call you?" I asked. "Twice," Teresa replied. "I didn't answer. You told me not to." I nodded. "Good. Let them read the fine print." Lydia entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Bad news?" she asked. "No," I said with a faint smile. "Just gravity doing its job." We stepped out onto the balcony, the breeze soft against my skin. Somewhere across the ocean, my daughter was learning a lesson about ownership, the kind not found on deeds or titles, but in conscience. Lydia clinked her cup against mine. "To peace?" she said. "To balance," I corrected. Alyssa stood before the beach house, still dressed in the linen resort clothes she'd worn on the yacht. The driveway was lined with moving trucks, and boxes labeled Ellis and Marie filled the porch. "There must be some mistake," she said, pressing the gate code again. The lock beeped red. Nathan, already tense, pulled out his phone. "I'll call Teresa." But she didn't answer. Inside the house, through the large windows, they could see the new couple unpacking. The wife was arranging fresh flowers in the kitchen, the husband hanging a painting where Alyssa's family photo used to be. "This is insane," Alyssa whispered, voice trembling. Nathan scrolled rapidly through his emails, his composure cracking. "She couldn't have—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at the document on his screen. "The deed," he muttered. "Her name was never removed." Alyssa turned toward the horizon, where the sea shimmered without sympathy. "She sold it," she said, barely audible. The words hung heavy between them. For the first time, the house felt foreign, no longer a sanctuary, but a mirror showing what they had become, guests in a life they thought they owned. Nathan kicked the locked gate once, then twice, the sound sharp against the breeze. "Let's go," he said. "We'll fix this." But Alyssa didn't move. The next morning, Nathan stormed into their bank. Alyssa trailed behind, sunglasses hiding eyes swollen from crying. "There's been a mistake," Nathan told the clerk, slamming his ID on the counter. "Our linked line of credit, it's frozen. We can't access our funds." The young banker typed quickly, glancing nervously at the screen. "Sir, according to our records, the account has been legally closed by the primary holder." Nathan's voice tightened. "I'm the primary holder." The banker shook his head. "Actually, it was under Mrs. Bennett's authority." Silence cut through the air. Alyssa's breath hitched. "My mother?" she whispered. The banker nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Everything was handled within legal bounds." Nathan's composure fractured. "Unbelievable," he hissed, pacing. "She did this while we were gone." Alyssa sank into the chair beside him, her hands trembling. "She told me once that control isn't loud. It's quiet," she murmured. Nathan ignored her, demanding meetings, explanations, anything to undo what was already done. But there was nothing to fix. The account was gone, the assets transferred, the power balance rewritten. When they left, the banker exhaled slowly, pity flickering across his face. "She played the long game," Alyssa said softly as they stepped outside. Nathan didn't answer. His silence said enough. That night, Alyssa sat in her darkened living room, phone in hand. The yacht photos were still open on her screen. Sunsets, champagne, smiles that now felt cruelly artificial. She scrolled through them until her thumb froze on one image, herself laughing beside Nathan, the sea endless behind her. It looked like a stranger's life. She switched to her messages, found my name, and hovered over the call button. "Mom," she whispered to no one. The word broke in the air like glass. She wanted to apologize, to beg for understanding, but every draft she typed sounded small against what she'd done. "I didn't mean it," she wrote, then deleted it. "I miss you." Delete. "Please call me." Delete again. The cursor blinked, patient and merciless. Tears slipped down her cheek, landing on the screen. She finally set the phone down, unable to hit send. Outside, the wind rustled the palm trees, and the silence that once felt like victory now felt like exile. She looked toward this empty wall where the beach photo used to hang. "It was never just a house," she said softly. "It was her." But the room stayed quiet, and the phone stayed dark. Somewhere across the ocean, I slept soundly. The following morning, Nathan stormed into Teresa's office unannounced. The receptionist barely had time to stand before he shoved open the glass door. "Where is she?" he demanded. Teresa looked up from her desk, calm as ever, pen still poised above a document. "If you're referring to Mrs. Bennett, she's abroad." "Abroad?" he repeated, incredulous. "She had no right to sell that property." Teresa closed the folder in front of her and leaned back. "Actually, she had every right. Her name was the only one on the deed." His jaw tightened. "We were family." "Legally," she said evenly, That's irrelevant. He glared, pacing the room. Do you realize what she's done? She ruined us. Teresa tilted her head slightly. Or perhaps she simply stopped financing your illusion. For a moment, the room went still. Nathan's fists clenched, his voice dropping to a hiss. You all think she's some saint, don't you? Teresa met his anger with quiet strength. No, I think she's someone who finally understood value. He stared at her, breath ragged, before slamming his hand against the desk. The sound reverberated through the office. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out, glass door shaking behind him. Teresa exhaled slowly, whispered, "About time," and returned to her paperwork. 2 days later, a certified envelope arrived at Alyssa's doorstep. The return label bore Donovan Pike's firm logo in sharp serif type. She tore it open, her pulse racing. Inside were the official post-sale notices, the final transfer documents, the property tax clearance, and a cover letter confirming that all actions had been legally executed under my authorization. Every paragraph was composed in calm, legal language, but to Alyssa it read like a verdict. She sat down on the couch, her hands trembling as she turned each page. The signature at the bottom, mine, was steady, decisive. There were no angry words, no explanation, just formality. Nathan entered, holding his phone. "What's that?" "From my mother's lawyer," she whispered. He grabbed the papers, scanning them quickly, his face darkening with every line. "It's over," she said softly. She made sure of it. He threw the documents onto the coffee table, the pages fanning out like feathers. "She's punishing us." Alyssa shook her head slowly. "No, Nathan, she's teaching us what she already learned." The room fell into silence except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. On the last page, below the seal, one sentence stood out. All matters settled. No pending obligations. For Alyssa, it felt less like an ending, and more like a mirror. The following morning, Nathan sat in his office surrounded by financial ledgers and screens flashing red warnings. His brokerage accounts, frozen. The joint fund he'd opened using Alyssa's credentials, under review. The credit cards once paid through my line, declined. He slammed his laptop shut and cursed under his breath. Alyssa entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee, her eyes wary. "Another issue?" she asked. He looked up, jaw tight. "It's not an issue. It's sabotage." She sat across from him. "Or maybe it's just the consequence of taking too much for granted." He ignored her, grabbing his phone. "I'll fix it. I'll call the bank again." But every call met the same polite refusal. "I'm sorry, sir. Access has been legally restricted." Alyssa watched as frustration tightened every movement of his body. "She warned me," she said softly. "She told me control doesn't need noise." Nathan's eyes flashed. "You think she's right?" "I think she's calm," Alyssa replied. "And that scares you more than anger ever could." He threw the phone onto the desk. "We'll rebuild," he muttered, "without her money." She didn't respond. Instead, she reached for one of the scattered papers and smoothed its creased edges, as if order could be salvaged through touch alone. "Maybe," she said, "but some debts can't be repaid in dollars." Later that week, Nathan showed up unannounced at Donovan's Boston office. The secretary's attempt to stop him failed as he pushed through the door. Donovan looked up from a stack of files, unshaken. "Mr. Caldwell," he said calmly, "to what do I owe this intrusion?" Nathan tossed a folder onto the desk. "You knew what she was doing. You helped her." Donovan adjusted his glasses, scanning the folder without emotion. "Mrs. Bennett requested legal actions well within her rights. I simply facilitated." "You destroyed us!" Nathan shouted, voice echoing off the polished walls. Donovan remained seated, his tone firm. "No, Mr. Caldwell. You destroyed your own standing when you mistook generosity for obligation." The words landed harder than any insult. Nathan's breathing quickened, anger and humiliation clashing behind his eyes. "She'll regret this," he hissed. Donovan leaned forward slightly. "Regret requires guilt. She has none left to give you." May. Security entered quietly. their presence enough to end the confrontation. Nathan straightened his jacket, trying to recover what dignity remained. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward the door. Donovan replied, "For her, it ended the moment she signed." As Nathan left, Donovan exhaled softly, closing the folder with deliberate care, the sound echoing like a gavel. That night, Alyssa sat alone on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by unopened boxes and a silence that stretched too far. Nathan was gone. He'd left hours earlier after another shouting match that ended with a slammed door and a bitter, "Figure it out." She held the framed photo from their wedding, her reflection fractured by the cracked glass. Her phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend. Nathan's firm just suspended operations, investigation pending. Alyssa closed her eyes, the room spinning around her. Everything she had built, every illusion of wealth, love, and control, had collapsed like a house without foundation. She crawled toward the window, the city lights blurring through tears. "Mom," she whispered, voice trembling. "I get it now." The words were small, but they carried a truth she'd never spoken before. She placed the photo face down and sat in the dim glow of the street lamp, filtering through the curtains. Somewhere far away, across the ocean, I was painting by the sea, unaware of her breaking point. But perhaps, in some unseen way, she knew I'd already left her the blueprint for rebuilding. The plane touched down in Nice beneath a sky brushed with pale gold. When the cabin doors opened, the scent of salt and lavender drifted in, warm and clean. I stepped onto the tarmac and felt the sunlight hit my face like a quiet benediction. After hours of gray airports and recycled air, the world suddenly bloomed in color. Lydia was waiting beyond customs, her hair tied loosely with a scarf speckled in blue paint. She waved with both hands, laughter spilling out before I even reached her. "You look alive again," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled faintly of turpentine and coffee. "Jet lag," I replied. "Or rebirth, I'm still deciding." She laughed louder. We drove along the coast, the Mediterranean gleaming beside us like liquid glass. Every curve of the road revealed another burst of light, another reflection of something I had lost and was beginning to find again. "Wait until you see the studio," Lydia said. "It's messy, loud, and perfect for starting over." I watched the horizon blur and thought, she's right. Perfection was never what I needed. I needed space to breathe. Lydia's apartment sat above a bakery that opened at dawn, filling the street with the scent of bread and almonds. Inside, her studio was a chaos of brushes, unfinished canvases, and streaks of dried paint across the floor. "You still hate order," I teased. She shrugged. "I traded it for honesty." She poured us each a glass of rosé, the light catching pink in the liquid. "So," she said, sitting cross-legged on the couch, "what are you running from this time?" "Not running," I said quietly. "Redesigning." She studied me for a long moment. "You always were the architect," she said, her voice softening. "Even when your life was burning, you still drew straight lines." I smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time to draw something crooked." She laughed, raising her glass. "To crooked lines, then." We clinked, and the sound rang through the room like a small, hopeful bell. Outside, the sun dipped lower, turning the walls a deep amber. Lydia stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "Come on. The studio window faces west. It catches the kind of light that forgives everything." I followed her, my chest lifting with something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. The window of Lydia's studio stretched wide, framing the sea like a living painting. I stood before it, barefoot, my reflection hovering over the horizon. The smell of paint thinner mingled with ocean air, creating an unexpected peace. Lydia adjusted a canvas on the easel and said, "This view saved me more than once." I nodded, watching the waves move in slow rhythm. "It's the opposite of Charleston," I said. "There, the water always felt heavy. Here, it breathes." Lydia handed me a clean brush. "Then start breathing with it." I hesitated. "I don't paint." "You didn't," she corrected. "Now you will." I touched the bristles to the palette, the pigment swirling, blue for loss, white for clarity, ochre for something unnamed. The first stroke felt tentative, then freeing. The color spread across the canvas like a confession. "It's strange," I murmured. "Designing meant control. This feels like surrender." Lydia smiled. "Sometimes they're the same thing, just spoken in different languages." I looked at her, then back at the window where the sea glowed in late afternoon light. For the first time, I wasn't building or fixing anything. I was simply letting something exist. Days passed quietly, marked by the rhythm of waves and the scrape of brushes. Lydia worked beside me, humming along to a jazz record that skipped every few minutes. I began to lose track of time. My first painting was small, just a cluster of color that resembled nothing specific, yet felt undeniably mine. Cobalt, white, and a touch of muted gold spread like memory. When I finished, I stepped back and realized what I'd painted wasn't the sea at all. It was silence. Lydia looked over my shoulder and smiled. "That's it," she said. "What?" "The sound of stillness. You've been chasing it for years." I laughed quietly, tears pricking at my eyes. "It's imperfect," I said. "Good," she replied. "Perfection is sterile. This breathes." We leaned against the table, watching the paint dry. The window light shifted, turning everything soft and real. "You think you'll keep painting?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'll just keep listening to what the colors want." Lydia grinned. "Now you sound like an artist." And for the first time, the word didn't feel foreign. It felt like home. One afternoon, while I was cleaning brushes, Lydia burst through the door, a letter in her hand. "You need to read this," she said, eyes shining. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened the envelope. It was from Marianne Duvall, owner of a local gallery. The handwriting was elegant and unhurried. "We've heard of your recent work through Lydia. Would you consider showing a few pieces at our spring exhibition?" My heart skipped. "This must be a mistake," I said. "I've barely begun." Lydia shook her head. "That's why it's perfect. People don't need polish. They need truth." I looked at my paint-stained fingers, the same hands that once drafted blueprints for houses I'd never live in. Now they were shaping something honest, something alive. "You think I'm ready?" "I think you already said yes," she replied. I smiled, realizing she was right. Sometimes opportunity doesn't knock. It paints itself into the corner of your life until you can't ignore it. I placed the letter beside my easel and whispered, "All right then, let's hang my silence on a wall." Lydia laughed, clinking her brush against mine like a toast. "To silence," she said, "and to art that speaks anyway." The letter arrived on a rainy morning, slipped beneath the studio door like a ghost that had found its way home. My name was written in Alyssa's careful handwriting, elegant, hesitant, as if each letter had cost her something. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The paper was thick, the ink slightly smudged. "Mom," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know I understand now. The house, the silence, the distance, it wasn't cruelty. It was a mirror. Nathan's gone. The business collapsed. I thought I'd lost everything, but I see now I only lost what was never mine to keep." My hands trembled slightly as I read. "You built homes for everyone but yourself. I finally see how much of you lived in the spaces you left empty." The letter ended simply. "If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I love you, even if I didn't know how to show it." The rain tapped softly against the glass. I folded the paper carefully, pressing the crease flat. For years, I'd imagined this moment with anger or tears, but instead, all I felt was stillness. That evening, after the rain cleared, I walked along the Promenade des Anglais, the sea glowing under the streetlights like liquid silver. The air smelled faintly of salt and citrus, and the rhythm of waves matched the steady cadence of my breath. I carried Alyssa's letter folded in my pocket, its weight both tender and grounding. Couples passed by, laughter trailing behind them, but I walked alone, content in the quiet company of reflection. Every step brought back pieces of memory: her first sketch at the kitchen table, the laughter that once filled our Charleston home, the silence that followed. Yet for the first time, those memories didn't ache. They simply existed. I paused at the railing overlooking the dark water and whispered, "She's learning." The sea responded with a single rolling wave that broke softly against the rocks. I smiled. The world, vast and indifferent, still found a way to echo back something human. I pulled out the letter, reread the last line, and tucked it close to my heart. "I love you, even if I didn't know how to show it." Maybe love wasn't a gesture or apology. It was this: two women on different shores, finally breathing the same air of peace. When I returned to the studio, Lydia was waiting with 2 mugs of tea, her expression soft but knowing. "You heard from her," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, handing her the folded letter. She read it silently, her eyes glistening. "So what now?" she asked. I shrugged. "Maybe nothing. Maybe that's the point." Lydia sat across from me, elbows resting on her knees. "You could write back," she said gently. "Or you could let silence finish the conversation." I looked toward the window, where the sea reflected the rising moon. "I think silence has said enough," I murmured. Lydia smiled faintly. "You always did prefer the minimalist approach." I laughed softly. "I learned from the best." She reached across and squeezed my hand. "Julia, you've built something new here. Don't let guilt drag you back into the old blueprint." Her words settled in the air like brushstrokes of truth. I exhaled slowly. "Then I'll stay in the present," I said. Lydia lifted her cup. "To the present, where everything finally fits." We clinked our mugs together, and I felt something inside me align, quietly but perfectly. That night, I couldn't sleep. The letter lay on my nightstand, its presence pulsing softly in the dark like a heartbeat. I rose and walked to the studio, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet. The canvas stood blank under the lamplight, waiting. I poured a glass of water, dipped my brush into blue paint, and hesitated. There was nothing left to say to Alyssa, no words that would fill the years we'd both spent building walls. But I could still create something wordless that might carry what letters couldn't. I began to paint in wide, deliberate strokes. A shoreline, 2 shadows standing apart, yet touched by the same light. Each movement felt like breathing. By the time the sun rose, the painting was finished. I stepped back, heart steady, mind clear. It wasn't forgiveness or apology, it was coexistence. I signed my name in the corner, the letters small but certain. "For both of us," I whispered. Then I opened the window, letting the sea breeze dry the last traces of blue. When Lydia saw the new painting, she stood in silence for nearly a minute before speaking. "It's not what I expected," she said softly. On the canvas, the sea stretched between 2 figures, one older, one younger, each reaching out but not touching. Between them shimmered a bridge of light, faint yet unmistakable. "What will you call it?" she asked. I smiled. "The family." She tilted her head. "That's brave." "It's honest," I replied. "Family isn't proximity, it's recognition." Lydia nodded slowly, her eyes tracing the thin line of gold connecting the 2 figures. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I watched her, realizing that this was the culmination of everything: the betrayal, the silence, the art, the peace. Every color carried a chapter: blue for loss, white for clarity, gold for forgiveness. I touched the edge of the canvas. Maybe this is what she and I needed, a way to exist in the same frame without erasing each other. Lydia smiled. "Then hang it where the light hits first." I did. And as the sun rose higher, the golden bridge between mother and daughter glowed brighter, like an apology accepted by the morning itself. The gallery smelled of fresh paint and champagne, that peculiar mix of polish and anticipation. Guests flowed in like a tide, artists, collectors, locals drawn by curiosity. Lydia stood beside me, radiant in a cobalt dress that matched the sea outside. Mary Ann, the curator, greeted us with her usual composure. "Julia, your work anchors the exhibit," she said. "People feel something before they even know why." I smiled, unsure how to respond. The walls shimmered with my paintings, the family front and center, catching the soft light like a living thing. Strangers stopped, whispered, lingered longer than I expected. One woman touched her chest and murmured, "It feels like forgiveness." I turned away before emotion could betray my calm. Lydia handed me a glass of wine. "You realize this is your debut," she teased. "At 63. I laughed quietly. It took me that long to paint the truth. The music swelled, mingling with laughter, camera flashes, and the hum of appreciation. For once, the noise didn't overwhelm me. It carried me. As the evening stretched on, I caught my reflection in the gallery window, calm, composed, and undeniably alive. For years, I'd built homes for others. Tonight, I'd built a space that finally held me. The next morning, a journalist from a local art magazine met me at a seaside cafe. Her notepad was open before her, pen poised with eager curiosity. "Mrs. Bennett, your debut has stirred quite the reaction," she said. "May I ask, what inspired these pieces?" I smiled, stirring my coffee slowly. "A text message," I replied. Her eyebrows lifted. "That's unexpected." I nodded. "It changed my life. At first, it felt like a loss, but it turned into a design challenge, how to rebuild a soul without the old foundation." She scribbled quickly, intrigued. "So your art became healing?" "Not healing," I said softly. "Reframing." She looked thoughtful. "And the family? It's deeply emotional. Are the figures based on real people?" I met her gaze. "They're everyone who's ever been both hurt and forgiven, including me." She smiled gently. "That's beautiful." The wind lifted the edge of her notebook, rustling the pages like applause. "Last question," she said. "If you could describe your art in one word?" I paused, then answered, "Freedom." When she left, I remained at the table, watching the waves roll in. For the first time, I wasn't explaining my life. I was simply living it. A week later, Marianne called while I was cleaning brushes. "Julia," she said, her voice bright with disbelief, "the family has been sold." I froze, the brush dripping blue onto my apron. "Already?" "To a private collector from New York," she said. "He didn't even negotiate the price. He said the piece reminded him of his mother." I smiled faintly. "Then it found the right home." Marianne hesitated. "He asked if you'd include a short note for provenance, something personal." I thought for a moment, then tore a sheet from my sketchbook. I wrote, "This painting was born from silence, shaped by forgiveness, and finished by light. May it always remind you that connection doesn't require closeness, only grace." When I signed my name, I realized my hand wasn't shaking. Marianne promised to handle the shipment carefully. "The gallery's offering you a full feature next month," she added. I thanked her, hung up, and stood before the empty space on the wall where the family had hung. The light still touched it, even without the canvas. That, I realized, was the point. Some things remain, even after they're gone. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The funds from the sale had already arrived, more than I'd imagined. I didn't hesitate. I drafted a letter to Donovan. "Please allocate these proceeds to the Lakewood Foundation. Specify the grant for women over 50 pursuing creative reinvention." I paused, then added, "Call it the Renewal Fund." The words came easily, without the heaviness of obligation. I wasn't giving away money. I was redirecting gratitude. Lydia entered the room, wiping paint from her hands. "Another project?" she asked. "A continuation," I said. She smiled knowingly. "You never stop designing." I nodded. "Just changing materials." When I hit send, a quiet satisfaction spread through me. Not pride, not relief, but completion. I looked toward the balcony, where the sea shimmered under the moonlight. "We build our own peace," I whispered. Lydia leaned against the doorway. "And sometimes," she said, "you build it so others can walk inside." I turned off the lamp, leaving only the silver glow of the water. The next morning, the phone rang just as sunlight spilled across the studio floor. Donovan's voice came through the line, calm but warm. "Julia," he said, "I read your email. The renewal fund. It's extraordinary." I smiled, resting the brush in my hand. "It felt right," I said. "It's time something good came from all that silence." He chuckled softly. "You always did turn pain into architecture." His tone shifted, gentler. "You know, when I handled the deed transfer, I suspected you weren't just closing doors. You were blueprinting something larger." "Maybe," I said. "I just didn't know what shape it would take." Donovan paused. "Now it has one. The foundation is legally recognized, and your first grant proposal is already being drafted." My breath caught. "Already?" "Word travels fast when hope is involved," he replied. "I'll oversee everything to ensure your intentions stay intact." I glanced toward the window, where the sea glimmered like polished glass. "Thank you, Donovan," I said quietly. "You've always known how to protect structure." "And you," he replied, "finally learned how to live beyond it." After we hung up, I stood in the sunlight for a long time, the warmth settling into me like a promise, one that didn't require words, only continuation. Every morning after that, I began to write letters, not to anyone in particular, just words addressed to the air, to time, to versions of myself that had survived. Lydia teased me, calling it my architect's journaling. But to me, they were foundations made of ink. Some letters were brief. "You did your best." Others were longer, exploring quiet revelations about forgiveness, motherhood, and art. I didn't intend to send them. I simply needed to record what peace sounded like. Over time, the stack grew, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. One morning, Lydia found me sealing another envelope. "Who's this one for?" she asked. I smiled. "Alyssa, maybe. Or maybe for whoever I used to be." She nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You realize you're writing the next exhibit." I laughed softly. "Maybe, but this one doesn't need a wall." Outside, the waves rolled against the shore with the same rhythm as my heartbeat. I realized then that not every message needed a recipient. Some truths just needed to exist, to breathe, to rest, to be. It was Lydia who first suggested it. We were sitting on the balcony sipping afternoon tea when she said, "You should turn your letters into a book." I laughed. "No one needs to read my reflections. They're too quiet." She leaned back, squinting against the sun. "That's exactly why they should. The world's loud enough. Maybe it's ready for stillness." I hesitated. "I'm not a writer." "You weren't a painter either," she reminded me. I smiled. "Touché." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Call it Foundations of Light. It fits you, strong, deliberate, full of grace." I rolled the title on my tongue. Foundations of Light. The phrase felt right, like a key clicking into place. "Maybe," I said slowly, "but only if the proceeds go to the foundation." Lydia grinned. "Now you sound like yourself again." The breeze lifted her scarf, scattering tiny flecks of paint into the air. For a moment, they looked like stars in daylight. A week later, Donovan called again to finalize the paperwork. "We'll need a formal name," he said. "Renewal fund is fine legally, but a foundation needs identity." I thought for a moment, looking around the studio, the sunlight cutting through the window, touching the framed painting of the family. "Call it the Lakewood Foundation," I said softly, "after the house, after everything that was lost and remade." There was silence on the line, then Donovan's quiet approval. "Lakewood," he repeated. "It carries memory and peace." "Exactly," I said. "It's not about forgetting where we came from. It's about building better from it." I heard him smile through the phone. "You realize you've closed the loop, Julia." "No," I said gently. "I've redesigned it." After we hung up, I looked toward the sea. Its surface shimmered like glass, endlessly reconstructing itself with every wave. It was the perfect emblem for what I'd built, something that could bend without breaking. When Donovan visited Nice 2 weeks later, he stopped by the gallery first. He stood before the family's print, hands folded behind his back before turning to me with a smile. "You know," he said, "most people spend their lives searching for closure. You designed it." I laughed softly. "Maybe closure isn't the end, it's the clean line before a new plan." He nodded, admiring the view of the sea beyond the glass. The Lakewood Foundation is already inspiring applications. Artists, teachers, even women leaving corporate jobs to rediscover themselves. I felt a warmth rise in my chest. "That's all I ever wanted," I said. Donovan handed me a folder. "Everything's approved. Legal, financial, ethical. It's airtight." I smiled. "Of course it is. You drafted it." He chuckled. "You did most of the blueprinting yourself." We walked to the balcony, sunlight pouring over the tiled floor. "You realize," he said, "this, your art, your piece, it's justice by design." I looked out at the water and nodded. "And forgiveness by choice." He raised his glass of mineral water. "To both." We clinked glasses as the waves rolled below, carrying our reflections somewhere quiet and eternal. One morning, I found a new canvas waiting by the studio window, wrapped in linen and tied with a silk ribbon. Lydia stood nearby, pretending not to watch. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled. "A blank start, for whatever comes next." I untied the ribbon and pulled away the cloth. The canvas shimmered faintly in the morning light, the surface smooth and inviting. Lydia handed me a note she'd slipped beneath the frame. "You've painted the past, Julia. Maybe now it's time to paint tomorrow." I read it twice, smiling at her quiet wisdom. "You always know what to say," I murmured. "Only to you," she said, "because you listen." I propped the canvas against the wall, not ready to paint yet, but ready to imagine. Through the window, the sea rippled, its colors shifting between silver and blue. For the first time, the blank space didn't feel empty. It felt alive, like breath before the first word, or silence before music. Lydia poured us each coffee and said softly, "New light, new chapter." I nodded, my hand resting lightly on the edge of the untouched frame. "This time," I said, "I'll paint without fear." 2 days later, I took the train to the small hillside cemetery overlooking Nice. The graves were nestled among olive trees, their branches swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. I carried a single white lily, the same flower I'd placed on my husband's grave years ago in Charleston. This time, it wasn't about mourning. It was about acknowledgement. I found a quiet bench beside a weathered headstone and sat for a while, listening to cicadas hum. "You'd laugh," I whispered. "You always said I'd never slow down." The wind rustled in reply, as if agreeing. I thought of the years spent building a life for others, every wall drawn, every foundation laid, every sacrifice justified. And then I thought of the art, the sea, the letters, the silence that had healed what time never could. I placed the lily on the stone and closed my eyes. "Thank you," I said simply, "for teaching me to build, even when I didn't know what I was building toward." As I stood, the sunlight filtered through the trees, scattering flecks of gold across the ground. I walked back toward the gate feeling lighter, as though I'd left part of my grief behind and carried something gentler home. That night, I dreamed in blueprints. Lines and curves unfolded across my mind like memories revisited. I saw my younger self hunched over a drafting table, tracing symmetry into chaos. The sound of pencils, the scent of paper, the faint hum of ambition, they all returned in fragments. Then came flashes. Alyssa's laughter as a child, paint-stained walls, the echo of a slammed door, the marina's cruel text message. Each image shifted like overlapping transparencies, merging into one final design, my life rendered as architecture. There were faults, revisions, erasures, but the foundation held. In the dream, I picked up a pencil and began to draw a new line, this time freehand. No ruler, no calculation, just trust. The blueprint rippled and transformed into a canvas, colors spilling across it like sunrise. My husband's voice echoed faintly. You always design better when it's for love. I smiled in my sleep. When I woke, dawn was breaking through the window, painting the walls in warm gold. The dream faded, but its message stayed. I no longer needed to control the structure. I just needed to keep creating. And in that, I found the truest symmetry of all. The Lakewood Foundation's first official event took place in a restored hall overlooking the harbor. Rows of chairs faced a small podium framed by white lilies and a banner that read, "Rebuild, redefine, renew." Donovan spoke first, his voice calm and grounded, introducing the Foundation's mission and first grant recipient, a 52-year-old woman who'd rebuilt her life through sculpture after divorce. When it was my turn, I stepped to the microphone, my hands steady. "We all build differently," I said. "Some of us use wood, some use paint, some use forgiveness. But every creation starts with loss, because only emptiness can teach us where the light belongs." The audience fell silent, then applauded softly, respectfully. Lydia stood near the front, tears glinting in her eyes. When the recipient approached to thank me, she said, "Your story gave me permission to begin again." I smiled. "Then that's all the reward I need." Cameras flashed, and for once I didn't mind. The moment wasn't about me anymore. It was about every woman who had ever been told her best work was behind her. Back in the States, Alyssa sat at her kitchen table, her laptop glowing in the dim light. She had typed my name out of impulse, not intention, and the search led her to the Lakewood Foundation website. The homepage featured a photograph of the ocean, calm and endless, with the words, "Designed for Renewal" in soft gray text. She clicked through the photos, smiling women holding art supplies, a small team at work, my portrait standing quietly beside the mission statement. Her eyes filled as she read the description. Founded by architect and artist Julia Bennett to empower women rediscovering purpose through creation. She whispered my name like a prayer. Then she saw the listed projects, scholarships, community studios, a grant titled the Family Fund. She smiled through tears, realizing the name wasn't coincidence. She closed the laptop slowly and pressed her palms together. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly. Outside, her children laughed in another room, the sound carrying warmth through the house. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "We'll visit someday." That evening, Lydia and I sat on the balcony as the sun melted into the horizon. The sea caught the light and scattered it like broken glass, dazzling and quiet all at once. Lydia poured us each a glass of wine and said, "You know, I think peace looks good on you." I laughed. "I think it finally fits." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors shift from gold to violet. "Do you ever miss the old life?" she asked. I thought for a moment. Sometimes, but not the noise, not the rush to be everything for everyone. I miss the moments before knowing, when I still believed beginnings could happen at any age. She smiled. "They still can." I looked at her, the wind lifting strands of her hair. "You're right. I'm still designing, just with time instead of blueprints." Lydia raised her glass. "To the design of peace," she said. I clinked mine against hers, and to the art of staying. The sky dimmed, the waves softened, and the day folded itself into silence. It wasn't an ending. It was a continuation, drawn in light, bordered by calm. That night, under the soft hum of the desk lamp, I began one final letter, this time to myself. "Dear Julia," I wrote, "you spent too many years designing lives for others and calling it love. You forgot that the heart needs its own architecture too." The words came easily, flowing like tidewater returning home. You believed strength meant silence, and grace meant endurance. But now you know, grace is not in staying quiet. It's in choosing peace after the noise. I paused, listening to the waves against the shore, steady and patient. You did not fail by forgiving. You succeeded by not hardening. I smiled as I wrote the last lines. You can finally rest now, not because the work is done, but because you've learned how to live inside it. Keep building, keep painting, but never forget, you are the masterpiece." When I finished, I folded the letter neatly, tied it with a ribbon, and placed it atop the stack of morning letters. It wasn't meant to be mailed. The suitcase sat open on the bed, half full this time. I folded my clothes with care, not precision, each crease softer, less deliberate than before. Lydia leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Leaving already?" she asked. "Just visiting," I said. "I need to see Charleston one more time." She nodded, her smile wistful. "Different kind of trip, huh?" "Completely," I said, placing my sketchbook on top of my folded clothes. There were no heavy files, no blueprints, no lists of obligations, just essentials, and a single small painting titled, "Light Returning." Lydia watched quietly as I zipped the case. "You used to pack like you were preparing for battle," she said. I smiled. "Now it's just a walk home." She hugged me tightly before stepping back. "You'll come back?" "Always," I said. "Nice isn't a destination anymore. It's part of me." I glanced at the half-empty suitcase and realized it mirrored exactly how I felt. Lighter, freer, open for what's next. The morning of my departure, Nice shimmered under soft sunlight, the sea calm as glass. Lydia and I walked to the market one last time, the smell of oranges and salt filling the air. Vendors waved, calling out in familiar warmth. "You've made a home here," Lydia said. "Homes aren't places," I replied. "They're moments that refuse to fade." We stopped by the pier where I'd first stood months ago, lost and untethered. Now it felt like a beginning instead of an escape. "Will you paint while you're gone?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'll just watch the light." She smiled, slipping a small seashell into my hand. "For luck." I closed my fingers around it, feeling the smooth surface warm against my palm. "You've been my anchor," I whispered. "And you," she said, "taught me to drift." We hugged tightly, then parted at the train station. As the train carried me toward the airport, I watched the coastline fade behind me, its colors dissolving into memory. Nice didn't feel like a goodbye, it felt like a promise kept. On the plane back to the States, I sat by the window again, watching clouds gather like quiet thoughts. The hum of the engines was steady, almost meditative. I opened my journal, flipping past sketches and notes until I found a blank page. I drew 2 lines meeting at a horizon, one from France, one from Charleston. "Reconnection," I labeled it. Beside me, a young woman was reading a travel book. She glanced at my drawing and smiled. "That's beautiful," she said. "Are you an architect?" I paused, then answered softly, "Something like that." She nodded and returned to her book. Outside, sunlight cut through the clouds, a golden path stretching endlessly forward. I closed my eyes and imagined Alyssa's face, her children, the letter she had written. For the first time, I wasn't anxious about returning. The past no longer waited like a shadow. It welcomed me like an open door. I exhaled slowly, the sound blending with the steady pulse of the engines. Charleston greeted me with the scent of magnolia and salt. The streets were the same, cobblestones glistening after rain, wrought iron balconies draped in ivy. But I wasn't. I took a cab past familiar landmarks, the marina, the cafe where I once met Donovan, the quiet street that led to my old neighborhood. The beach house was gone now, replaced by new construction, all sharp lines and sterile perfection. Yet I felt no ache. I walked along the shore where my daughter once played, the sand warm beneath my shoes. The waves rolled gently, whispering a rhythm I recognized instantly. "You kept your promise," I murmured. In the distance, children laughed, their voices carrying across the water. I smiled, imagining Alyssa among them someday, perhaps standing at this very spot, realizing that love could outlast loss. I reached into my bag, pulled out the seashell Lydia had given me, and placed it on the sand. The tide crept close, kissed it once, and carried it away. "Thank you," I whispered, to the sea, to the past, to myself. The sun hung low over Charleston, and for the first time in years I felt entirely home. It happened quietly, without ceremony. I was walking along the pier when I saw her standing near the railing. Alyssa, in a soft cream dress, hair tied back, eyes red but determined. For a moment we just looked at each other, the wind moving between us like a bridge. She took a hesitant step forward. "Mom," she said, voice trembling. I nodded, my throat tight. "Hi, sweetheart." The words felt both strange and familiar, like a song I used to know. She held out an envelope. "For you," she whispered. Inside was a photo, her children, smiling in front of a canvas that read the Family Fund Art Day. My eyes filled. "You visited?" I asked. She nodded. I wanted them to see what forgiveness looks like. Silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy this time. She reached for my hand, tentative but real. "I don't expect you to forget," she said, "but I hope we can start from here." I squeezed her hand gently. "We already have." The gulls cried overhead, the sea breathed against the shore, and for the first time in years, there was no resentment, only relief. The past didn't vanish, it softened, and in that softness, we finally met again. We walked along the beach together, the tide curling over our footprints before they could fade. Alyssa talked softly about her children, her new studio, her plans to teach community art classes. I listened, not as a judge, but as a mother rediscovering her daughter's voice. "They're painting sunsets this week," she said with a shy smile. "I told them about you." I laughed. "I hope you left out the stubborn parts." "Never," she said. "That's the best part." The breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment she looked like the girl who used to run ahead of me on this same shore, chasing shells and light. "You know," I said, "we don't have to rebuild what was lost. We can design something new." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I'd like that." We stopped where the waves met our toes, the sea cool and forgiving. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for waiting." I smiled. "Thank you for finding your way back." The horizon stretched wide before us, unbroken and endless, like a canvas still waiting for its next stroke. 2 weeks later, the Lakewood Foundation opened its first official office in Charleston, a bright, airy space overlooking the harbor. Donovan gave the welcome speech while I stood beside Lydia, both of us beaming. The walls were adorned with paintings from scholarship recipients, each piece alive with resilience. Alyssa arrived late, her children in tow, carrying a bouquet of lilies. "For the founder," she said, placing them on my desk. I hugged her, feeling the full circle of everything we'd endured. Donovan raised his glass. "To second acts," he said. Laughter followed, light and genuine. The children wandered the gallery, pointing at the art, their laughter echoing like a promise. I looked around the room, the colors, the faces, the light, and realized this wasn't just a foundation. It was a living blueprint of survival turned into beauty. Lydia leaned close. "You've built peace into the walls," she whispered. I smiled. "Exactly where it belongs." That afternoon, the first scholarship recipient stepped up to the podium, a woman in her 50s named Marjorie Lane. Her voice trembled slightly as she began. "For years, I thought my life had already peaked. Then I found a flyer for the Lakewood Foundation." She paused, smiling through tears. "You reminded me that it's never too late to rebuild." The audience applauded softly, some wiping their eyes. I felt Lydia's hand squeeze mine, grounding me. Marjorie continued. "This grant allowed me to create again, to believe that my work still matters." Behind her, projected on the screen, was her sculpture, a twisting arc of reclaimed metal titled Resilience. It gleamed under the light, imperfect, yet whole. "You didn't just fund art," she said, looking at me. "You funded courage." My throat tightened. I rose and hugged her as the crowd stood in applause. For the first time, I understood that legacy wasn't about what we leave behind, but what we set in motion. That night, Charleston was bathed in gold. I sat on my balcony, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the last light scatter across the harbor. The city hummed quietly, distant and alive. My gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the water met the fading sun. I thought of the text that had once shattered me, the words that began this entire journey. It's for family only. Back then, those words had cut like glass. Now, they felt like the blueprint of transformation. The family I'd lost had become the foundation for something larger, something self-made and luminous. I whispered to the wind, "You took away a trip. I found a journey." The waves answered softly, their rhythm steady and forgiving. The tea cooled in my hands, the stars began to blink awake, and for the first time in years, I felt no pull toward the past. Everything I'd built, the art, the foundation, the peace, wasn't born from revenge, but from reclamation. A week later, a cream-colored envelope arrived, stamped from Paris. The handwriting was instantly familiar, Lydia's. I sat at my desk, slicing it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a photograph, her new gallery, sunlight pouring through tall windows. My painting Negative Space hung in the center. On the back of the photo she'd written, "Your colors still hang where the light is best." Beneath it, a short note. "Paris is beautiful, but I miss our mornings by the sea. Keep painting, sister. The world needs your stillness." I smiled, touched the photo, and pinned it above my desk. The morning light filtered through the curtains, catching the glossy paper, making it glow. For a long time, I just watched the light shift across it, feeling her presence even across oceans. Distance, I realized, didn't dim love, it only reframed it. I whispered, "Merci, Lydia," and turned back to my canvas, ready to begin again. Saturday morning brought unexpected laughter. Alyssa's children burst into my office carrying a box of crayons and a roll of paper almost taller than they were. "Grandma, can we paint here?" the youngest asked, eyes wide with excitement. I moved aside my brushes. "Of course," I said. "Every great artist starts on the floor." They spread the paper across the hardwood, scribbling suns, waves, and stick figures with wild abandon. I knelt beside them, sketching a seashell while they giggled. The air smelled faintly of crayons and morning coffee. Alyssa leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly, her eyes soft. "They wanted to see where you make the magic," she said. I smiled. "It's not magic. It's patience." One of the children held up her drawing of the ocean. "Look, Grandma, it's calm now." I felt a lump in my throat. "Yes," I whispered, "it finally is." When they left later that day, the room was scattered with tiny masterpieces, the floor covered in color. I didn't clean it up. Some messes are worth keeping. The following week, I began teaching at the community center downtown. My students were women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, each with stories heavy as the canvases they carried in. "We're not here to paint perfection," I told them. "We're here to paint truth." Brushes dipped into water, colors bleeding and blending like memory. One woman, nervous, said, "Mine looks wrong." I knelt beside her and smiled. "There's no wrong in art, only unfinished courage." She laughed softly and kept painting. By the end of class, every canvas told a story of survival, of rediscovery, of quiet rebellion. As I walked among them, I felt a deep calm settle inside me. This was what the journey had been leading to, not revenge, not even forgiveness, but creation. The room glowed with afternoon light, the walls breathing with new beginnings. I said to them, "Don't erase your mistakes. Blend them. They make the painting yours." And in their smiles, I saw reflections of myself, women redesigning their lives, one stroke at a time. The waves returned, soft and eternal. I stood on the pier one evening, my hair lifted by the wind, the sound of gulls mingling with memory. My voice carried in the quiet. They sailed away once, calling it family. But I stayed, learning that family isn't bound by blood, it's built by grace. The camera of life, if there was one, would have shown fragments of my journey. The marina where the text arrived, the papers I signed, the house I sold, the art I made, the people I forgave. Revenge never built anything, I continued, but clarity did. Peace did. Behind me, the horizon blazed with orange light, the kind that turns water into gold. We spend half our lives proving our worth to others, I said. Then one day we realize the only approval we needed was our own. The tide rose, touching my feet. I smiled at the sea and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't to anyone in particular. It was to everything, to loss, to love, to life. Morning light glowed pale and pure across the shoreline. I walked barefoot along the same stretch of beach where my story had begun. The sand was cool, the wind gentle, carrying the scent of salt and new beginnings. Seagulls drifted overhead, their calls distant and calm. I bent down to pick up a small shell, spiraled, delicate, yet unbroken by the waves. Holding it in my palm, I traced its pattern, remembering everything that had led here. The text, the betrayal, the sail, the silence, the rebirth. "They taught me what family isn't," I murmured. "I learned what peace is." I sat at the edge of the tide, opened my sketchbook, and began to draw the shell's curve, its symmetry mirroring my own calm. The water touched my toes, retreating softly, as if bowing in respect. Overhead, the sky turned gold, and the horizon shimmered with light. I smiled, realizing the truth I'd been circling all along. Revenge had been the wave, but serenity was the shore. I closed my sketchbook, stood, and let the wind lift my hair. Behind me, the sea kept its rhythm, endless and forgiving. The camera would fade to white here, not as an ending, but as a beginning, reborn in quiet grace.